The lawyer cleared his throat, a dry, rustling sound that seemed to suck all the air out of the conference room. He gave me a look of practiced pity, the kind they save for toddlers who have scraped a knee. "According to this revised will, dated 6 weeks ago," he announced, his eyes flicking nervously toward my brother, Mark, and my sister, Alina, "your father, Mr. Albright, left you his photograph collection." The words just hung there. My sister, Alina, smirked from across the polished table, the corner of her mouth twitching in triumph. "He always said you were the sentimental one, Clara," she purred, her voice dripping with poison she tried to pass off as sympathy. My brother, Mark, the brand new CEO of Albright Industries, just stared straight ahead, not a flicker of emotion. They thought they'd left me with nothing but dusty photo albums. And they were right about one thing: they left me with memories. They just didn't realize my sharpest memories were of the secrets our family's fortune was built on. And I was about to remind them of every single one. They took my future, so I was going to take their entire world. I would dismantle it piece by piece until there was nothing left but scorched earth. This wasn't about an inheritance anymore. This was justice. Growing up in Albright was like living in a gilded cage. We had a sprawling stone manor, ponies, private tutors, summers in France, everything money could buy. Albright Industries, my father's creation, was a titan in its field, a monument to his ruthless ambition. From the outside, we were perfect. But inside, the gold was just plating. My father, Arthur Albright, was a man of monumental presence, and his love was tied to performance. Mark, the eldest, was groomed to be the heir, a carbon copy of our father but with none of the charm. Alina, beautiful and brilliant, was our family's social ambassador. Her marriage was more of a merger than a romance. Then there was me, the youngest, the quiet one who looked like our mother. I loved art and books, things my father called sentimental nonsense. While my siblings were learning about stock options and political dinner parties, I was the one listening to our father's stories. He'd pull out old, sepia-toned photos, telling me about the people and the past my siblings couldn't care less about. "Never forget where you come from, Clara," he'd say, his voice thick with a strange mix of pride and regret. The foundations are everything. When he got sick, it was a slow, cruel decline. The Titan became frail. Mark was too busy for more than a weekly flyby, his eyes always on his watch. Alina would sweep in with a cloud of designer perfume and forced cheerfulness, staying just long enough for it to count. So I moved back home. I put my life on hold for 2 years, trading archives for medicine schedules. I held his hand, I read to him, and I listened. It was in those quiet afternoons that he started talking about his biggest regret. He mentioned creative accounting and cutting corners back in the early days. He was hazy on the details, but his guilt was sharp. "I built this house on a shaky foundation, Clara," he whispered once, his eyes filled with a fear I didn't understand. "I need you to make it right. You're the only one I trust to fix it." A week later, he told me he'd had his lawyer draw up a new will. "I'm making you the executor, Clara," he'd said, his voice surprisingly firm. "A controlling interest. Mark can run the day-to-day, but you will hold the reins. You'll have the power to see what's really in the books and clean it up." He made me promise, so I promised. He died 3 months later. The funeral was a grand, public spectacle. Mark gave a stoic eulogy. Alina wept gracefully. I said nothing, clutching the memory of my promise like a lifeline. The will reading was a week later. I walked in feeling the weight of my promise, ready for my siblings' anger, but sure of my father's final wishes. That security evaporated the second Mr. Davison read the words. His photograph collection. The will he held was dated 6 weeks ago, a time when my father was so heavily medicated he could barely hold a pen. The signature was a pathetic, shaky scrawl. It looked nothing like his. It was a forgery, and a sloppy one at that. "That's not his signature," I said, my voice trembling but clear. "My father made a new will months ago. He told me he was putting me in charge." Mark didn't even bother to look at me. He just nodded to the lawyer. "My sister is emotional. Grief affects people in different ways." Alina placed a cold hand on my arm. "Clara, don't make a scene. Dad wasn't himself at the end. He probably just forgot." It was all planned. They painted me as the hysterical, grieving daughter who couldn't handle the truth. With 2 of them against one of me, my immediate challenge to the will in probate court was shot down. They had me escorted out of the building like I was a problem to be removed. They gave me 1 week to clear out of the house. The house where I'd spent the last 2 years caring for the man they'd all but abandoned. I packed my clothes, and I packed every last photograph. As I sealed the boxes, my father's words echoed in my head. The foundations are everything. Back in my tiny apartment, surrounded by boxes, my grief finally hardened into a cold, diamond-hard rage. They hadn't just stolen my inheritance. They de-stolen my father's last wish. They deforged his name to protect the very secret he'd asked me to expose. My first call wasn't to a fancy corporate lawyer, but to a grizzled probate litigator named Ben Carter, a man known for taking on powerful families. "It's a tough road," he said in a gravelly voice after I told him everything. "The burden of proof is on you. It'll be expensive." "I don't have money," I told him flatly. "They took it all." Ben leaned back, studying me. "What do you have?" "Memories," I said, "and photographs, boxes and boxes of photographs." A flicker of interest in his eyes. "Okay, let's start there." My apartment became a war room. While Ben filed a formal will contest in court, I started digging. I scanned every photo, every negative, going back in time. Then I found it. In an album labeled 1985 Expansion, there was a picture of my father with a man I'd only heard mentioned in whispers, Joseph Miller, his original partner. Behind them, a sign read Albright and Miller Precision Tools. Miller had been completely erased from the company history. On the back, my mother had written, Arthur and Joe. The day the dream became real. A shame it all ended so badly. This was the first thread. I spent days at the library, scrolling through old newspapers on microfiche. I found a few articles and then a brief notice from 1987. Joseph Miller had stepped down to pursue other interests. Ben's investigator found his death certificate. Suicide. 3 months after he stepped down. He left a wife and a young daughter. My blood ran cold. Ben suggested we hire a forensic accountant. I sold my car and my mother's jewelry to pay his fee. While he started digging into the numbers, I kept looking at the photos from that era. A new face kept appearing in the background, a man with cold eyes and expensive suits. I got a clear shot and sent it to Ben's investigator. The name came back an hour later. Vincent, the fixer Costello, a man with known mob ties. The pieces were clicking together. A business partnership gone sour. A partner's sudden death. A company that mysteriously boomed right after. A mob fixer in the shadows. My father hadn't just cut corners. He'd made a deal with the devil. Then came the real breakthrough. As an archivist, I know paper. Some of the negatives from the mid-'80s felt wrong. A specialist confirmed my hunch. "This isn't photographic film," he said. "It's microfilm." When we processed it, it wasn't pictures. It was documents. A second set of ledgers showing massive, unexplained cash infusions, a classic money laundering scheme. Joseph Miller must have wanted out. He was an engineer, not a criminal. He must have threatened to talk, so they brought in Costello to persuade him. The last document on the roll was a contract transferring Miller's 50% ownership to my father. In exchange, a trust was to be created for Miller's infant daughter, granting her a silent 25% share of the company on her 25th birthday. It was hush money, and the witness who signed it, Vincent Costello. The Albright fortune wasn't built on a shaky foundation. It was built on a crime. And my siblings, by forging that will, weren't just cutting me out. They were continuing the cover-up. They knew. In a lawsuit, there's a process called discovery, where both sides have to show their cards. Mark and Aliner's lawyers tried to bury us in paperwork to bleed me dry. They underestimated me. They always had. We asked for every version of my father's will. They produced 3. We sent them all to a forensic handwriting expert. The report was my first real weapon. The signature on their will was a definite forgery. And the signature on the will my father told me about, it was, with high probability, authentic. But that wasn't enough. Reverting to the real will would just split the estate 3 ways. That wasn't justice. The company would still be in their hands, the crime still buried. I didn't want my share. I wanted everything because none of it was truly theirs. It was built on the ghost of Joseph Miller. The trust was the key. Now we had to find the heir. Miller's daughter, Sarah. Her mother had remarried, changed their names, and vanished. It took Ben's investigator a month, but he found her. A schoolteacher in Oregon, with no idea she was heiress to a fortune. I flew out to meet her. In a small coffee shop, I didn't lead with the money. I started with the photos. I showed her the picture of our fathers, full of hope. I gave her the father she never knew. Then I told her the rest of the story. The microfilm, the ledgers, the contract. She listened, her face pale. But under the shock, I saw a core of steel. She agreed to let Ben represent her, too. Now we were a united front. The last piece was Costello. He was untouchable, so I didn't try to get to him. I just sent a message. I mailed the photos of him with my father in the 80s anonymously to the state's organized crime division. No note, just a photo. A little hint to connect a respectable company to the city's underworld. A seed of doubt that would start to make my siblings very, very nervous. The quiet, sentimental daughter was gone. In her place was a cold, meticulous strategist. I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to use their own dark playbook against them. Mark and Alina planned a massive 50th anniversary gala for Albright Industries. It was their public coronation, a monument to their own arrogance. It was the perfect stage for their downfall. The day of the gala, Ben filed an emergency motion with the court, laying out everything. The handwriting analysis, the microfilm, Sarah Miller's trust, and her sworn statement. He asked the judge to freeze all of Albright Industries' assets immediately. Faced with overwhelming evidence of fraud, the judge agreed. We walked into that gala just as Mark was taking the stage. He stood in the spotlight, the picture of success, talking about legacy and integrity. As he spoke, a few men in dark suits started quietly moving through the room. The company's top lawyer rushed to the stage, his face white, whispering frantically to Alina. I saw the color drain from her face. She looked out into the crowd, her eyes searching, and then she saw me. It wasn't anger in her eyes, it was pure fear. The news was spreading through the room like a virus. Assets frozen, fraud investigation. Mark, oblivious, kept reading from the teleprompter. And it is with great pride that I carry my father's legacy of ethical business practices. That's when Sarah, Ben, and I started walking toward the stage. We walked slowly, right through the parting crowd. The room went silent. We stopped at the foot of the stage. I looked up at my brother. Mark, I said. My voice was calm, but it carried through the silent ballroom. You forgot to mention your father's first partner, Joseph Miller. He physically flinched. You speak of legacy, I continued, my voice sharp and clear. But you forgot the 25% of this company that belongs to his daughter, Sarah. I gestured to Sarah beside me. A legacy your father tried to hide and that you tried to bury by forging his will. A gasp went through the crowd. Alina rushed at me, her face a mask of rage. How dare you, she hissed. You are nothing, he left you nothing. He left me his photographs, I said, my voice dangerously soft. And in them I found everything. The laundered money, the broken trust, the ghost you built this empire on. Your assets are frozen. The SEC and the IRS have been notified, and the DA is opening a criminal investigation. Mark stumbled back from the podium as if I'd hit him. The reporters in the room, smelling blood, swarmed the stage, their cameras flashing like lightning. I looked at my siblings, their world crumbling around them. I felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction, just a quiet, empty finality. You left me with nothing, I whispered, for their ears only. So I'm taking everything. I turned my back and walked away, leaving them to the wolves. The fallout was swift and brutal. The Albright name became synonymous with crime. The legal battles were ugly, but the outcome was never in doubt. The forged will was thrown out. The real will, the one leaving me in control, was validated. Mark and Alina were arrested. The trial revealed they'd known the truth all along. Their father had confessed to them, too, hoping they'd help him make it right. Instead, they saw his guilt as a threat and forged the will to cut me out, knowing I was the only one who would honor his final wish. Mark got 10 years in federal prison. Alina got 3. The lawyer was disbarred. As executor, I oversaw the complete dissolution of Albright Industries. Every asset was liquidated, every building sold. After massive government fines, Sarah Miller finally received her 25% share of what was left. It was justice for her father. The rest was mine. The manor, the vacation homes, the art, I sold it all. I only kept the photographs. I live in a small house by the sea now. It's quiet. It's mine. I have no family left. My father's legacy isn't one of industry, it's one of crime and a last-ditch effort at redemption. It's a strange kind of victory. I burned their world to the ground to honor my father's last wish to fix the shaky foundation. I tore down the crooked house he built so that something honest could be built in its place. I used every last cent of my inheritance to establish the Joseph Miller and Arthur Albright Foundation for Ethical Business. It's a place that teaches young entrepreneurs the lesson my family learned too late. A legacy built on lies will always, eventually, crumble to dust. They left me with memories. In the end, they were the only thing worth keeping. And that's the story of how they left me with nothing, so I took everything they had. If you've ever felt wronged or underestimated, remember that the truth has a funny way of coming out, usually when you least expect it. Subscribe for more stories about justice and the strange ways people behave. Sometimes the quietest people have the most to say, and the things we dismiss as sentimental, like an old box of photos, can hold more power than any fortune. Thanks for listening. Until next time.